In Ecuador, indigenous movement and representatives of Guillermo Lazo's government began talks in search of a solution to the social crisis in the country. The Peruvian government has declared a state of emergency nationwide in all highways and roads due to the indefinite strike of transporters and farmers. In the United States, an Amtrak train with 243 passengers derailed Monday in the state of Missouri. Authorities report so far more than 50 injured and at least 4 dead. Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm Luis Alberto Matos from the teleSUR studios in Cuba. We begin with the news. In Ecuador, on the 15th day of the indefinite national strike, demonstrators from the Confederations of Indigenous Nationalities set up a dialogue table with the 5 branches of government at the Basilica Church. Government Minister Francisco Jimenez attended the meeting on behalf of President Guillermo Lazo. At the meeting, the leader of the Indigenous Confederation, Leonidas Issa, listed the issues that have prompted mobilizations nationwide. Issa asked the government representative to comply with the 10 demands made. Also at the meeting, both indigenous and civil organizations leaders underscored that all demonstrations have been peaceful. The Peruvian government has declared a state of emergency nationwide in all highways and roads due to the indefinite strike of transporters and farmers. This state of emergency is expected to remain in force for the next 30 days. Meanwhile, the police is trying to keep the situation in the country under control. Transport unions are to begin a national strike in protest for the increase in fuel prices. On their part, farmers will also be going on strike, demanding that the government addresses a series of demands, and they are questioning the executive for failing to carry out an agrarian reform. Peru's President Pedro Castillo will not receive the audit commission at the Government Palace. Castillo claims they do not comply with the guarantees of a fair process. The president's lawyer, Benji Espinosa, said that the parliamentary commission investigating the Zarratea case is not acting objectively, considering that the entity only aims at bringing charges against the head of state. He also warned that the commission had informed that it would present its final report this Wednesday without considering President Castillo's statements. The lawyer recalled finally that the referred working group did not deliver the elements of conviction or evidence they allegedly have on the case. In Brazil, according to the latest polls, former President Luis Ignacio Lula da Silva leads the voting intention for the presidential elections of October. According to a new survey by the Research Institute for Results Communication, Lula has 43% voting intention, while his President Jair Bolsonaro obtained 33% of support among those interviewed. The study also revealed that Lula would be tied, considering the margin of error of 2 percentage points, with the sum of all the other pre-candidates, which would guarantee him a victory in the first round. Authorities in Mexico report that at least 6 police officers were killed and 4 others were wounded on Sunday after being attacked by a group of armed men in the northern state of Nuevo León. León Defense Secretary Samuel Garcia said that the confrontation occurred in the early hours of Sunday morning when local police officers responded to an attack by unknown men in armored bands. The assailants outnumbered the police. Police sources say it is still unknown whether those involved in the attack belong to any criminal gang. Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador said in his morning briefing before the press this Monday that authorities have identified a group of criminals. He condemned their actions and said the investigation is still underway. Thousands of Haitians marched in support of former President Jean-Bertrand Aristide and demand he take the reins of the increasingly troubled Caribbean country. Demonstrators held leafy green branches, and some had the Haitian flag and pictures of Aristide as they walked peacefully through the capital of Port-au-Prince and denounced a spike in violence, a deepening economic crisis, and the worsening struggles that many in the country of more than 11 million people are facing after the killing of President Jovenel Moïse. The march came as Prime Minister met with civil society leaders and others in an attempt to stabilize the country and hold general elections. In the United States, an Amtrak train with 243 passengers derailed Monday in the state of Missouri. The train was heading from Los Angeles to Chicago at the time of the accident, when several cars derailed after colliding with a dump truck at a public crossing. Preliminary police reports indicated at least 4 dead and 50 injured, while authorities deployed a rescue operation to help the rest of the passengers. This accident occurs one day after another Amtrak train collided with a car in California, leaving 3 people dead. We are now taking a short break. Join us again after this. Welcome back to From the South. Authorities of the self-proclaimed Next People's Republic reported on Monday that the remains of 172 Ukrainian soldiers were found at the Azovstal steel plant. The finding is in addition to the discovery of the remains of the Ukrainian servicemen buried in the Petrovsky Park of Mariupol during the liberation of the city on May 20th. The prosecutor's office added that its investigators, together with the Russian Investigation Committee, found a list of those buried on the site, which allowed to identify them. The prosecutor's office also pointed out that the Ministries of Emergency Situations and Internal Affairs of Donetsk continue to examine the city of Mariupol's territory. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said Russia will export gold to other markets despite plans by G7 leaders of banning its trade. According to Peskov, the measure will only be forced to redirect Russia's gold exports to other markets where the product is in high demand and where there are more friendly legal and economic regimes. This decision was prompted by the measure announced this past Sunday, June 26, by several Western leaders who said that the United Kingdom, the United States, Canada and Japan plan to ban imports of Russian gold. The decision was labeled by the Russian authorities as legitimate. The Russian official recalled that the market of precious metals is a global one, quite wide and diverse, so that this measure will not truly affect Russia. In Germany, the heads of state members of the G7 group met this Sunday to seek a united bloc in support of Ukraine and the consequences of the conflict in Eastern Europe. The meeting between the leaders will be held until June 28 at Elmau Castle in the Bavaria region, where they will discuss the economic devastation caused by the war in Ukraine, the food as climate change. In the framework of the meeting, Joe Biden, President of the United States, announced new sanctions against Russia. Countries such as Germany, Canada, the United States, France, Italy, Japan, and the United Kingdom make up the group are seeking to strengthen the bloc's maneuvers to counteract China and Russia. Hundreds of protesters marched in Germany near where leaders of the G7 is meeting, demanding action on climate change. Demonstrators demanded that the G7 countries fulfill their responsibilities and become more active in tackling climate change and global hunger, among other issues. Protesters say world's problems cannot be solved by the world's 7 largest industrialized economies alone. They can only be truly solved through platforms such as the United Nations. Under a banner reading "Global Justice, Saving Climate Instead of Arming," several speakers addressed the crowd of protesters, calling for more action to fight climate change.
The leaders of the 7 most powerful Western nations, but the decisions they make are for the whole population of all countries in the world. And the countries that suffer most from the politics of the G7 are not sitting on the same table.
The government of France requested that Venezuela and Iran be allowed to return to the oil market in order to stop the increase in fuel prices at a global level. Emmanuel Macron, the French president, requested during the G7 Leaders Summit that both nations be able to return to the market, while he asked the countries that supply the international oil market to increase their production exceptionally. The objective of the French government would be to put a brake on the continuous rise in fuel prices in the last month as a consequence of the restrictions imposed by the West on Russian oil. Venezuela and Iran are central to world oil production, and in recent years they have been affected by economic sanctions imposed by the United States and its allies. Prosecutors in the Paris attack trial demanded a life sentence without parole for the main suspect in November 2015 strike that killed more than 100 people in France's terror assault. Salah Abdeslam is the only surviving member of the attackers, who opened fire in the Bataclan concert hall and on cafe terraces in adjacent streets, and detonated suicide bombs at the Stade de France sports arena. Also on trial are 19 others accused of various degrees of assistance to the killers, from providing logistical support to planning the attacks or supplying weapons. Prosecutors also request standard life sentences for suspected Islamic State members and a Belgian accused of having provided weapons and logistical support. The verdict is due on June 29th. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization will massively increase the number of high-response forces to more than 300,000 troops. Jens Stoltenberg, the organization's alliance Secretary General, announced that NATO will decide to increase the Rapid Reaction Force, which currently numbers about 40,000 troops, and provides operational support for the military group's operations. Stoltenberg previously stressed that NATO's summit in Madrid will adopt a new security concept where Russia will be recognized as a threat and partner of the organization.
We will transform the NATO response force and increase the number of our high readiness forces to well over 300,000.
More news coming up after a final short break, so don't go away. Welcome back from the South. Human rights organizations, as well as different governments and leaders of the Maghreb, have asserted that the Moroccan government plans to bury migrants killed at the Melilla fence in mass graves without identifying or determining the cause of death. At the Sidi Salem cemetery on the outskirts of the Moroccan city of Nador, less than 15 kilometers from the place of the events, workers prepare mass graves. Spanish and Moroccan activists claim that they plan to bury there at least 23 bodies of the African migrants massacred by Moroccan security forces last Friday. In addition to referring that the real number of deaths could exceed 40, they fear that they will be buried without a judicial investigation. At present, 18 migrants and one member of the Moroccan security forces are still in a local hospital. They are crucial to the investigation and to the identification of the victims.
Migration authorities make sure that there is no transparency. They hide and manipulate information. In other cases, they fail to investigate. Some of the information belongs to Morocco, and the treaties are on the basis of silence.
The African Union condemned the violent and degrading treatment exercised by Moroccan forces against thousands of migrants at the border fence of Melilla and called for an immediate and transparent investigation. The president of the African Union Commission, Moussa Faki Mahamat, expressed his deep shock at the violent treatment of African migrants who tried to cross one of the international borders of Morocco with Spain. The senior official of the regional group recalled that countries must comply with their obligations under international law, which includes, among other principles, that all migrants be treated with dignity while safety and human rights must be prioritized. Human rights associations on both sides of the border put the total number of deaths at between 27 and 37. On Monday, authorities reported that 10 people were killed and more than 200 injured in a toxic gas explosion in Jordan's Aqaba port. Footage on state TV showed that large cylinder plunging from a crane on a moored vessel, causing a violent release of a yellow gas. Nearby areas were evacuated and residents told to stay indoors. According to state media, Prime Minister Bish Kashawarne and Interior Minister Masen Al-Fahaya headed to the site of the accident. Civil Defense spokesman Amer Al-Sartawi earlier reported that 203 people were injured after the tank filled with toxic gas failed. Jordan's Aqaba port is the country's only marine terminal and a key transit point for a vast portion of its imports and exports. A child died and a number of others were injured after a three-story building collapsed in Tripoli, Lebanon. Residents of the Dag el-Magar area in Tripoli and rescue workers pulled a dead child and a number of injured people from the rubble following the collapse in the northern city. Residents stated that the building collapsed due to the state's negligence to all buildings. Members of the Red Cross, civil defense, and security forces rushed to the scene to help with recovery works.
Due to the state's negligence in such old buildings, a brick fell from the building, and when someone tried to move it, the whole building collapsed.
Young and old, men and women, authorities and traditional chiefs paid their respects to the coffin of Patrice Lumumba in Kinshasa, the last stage of the memorial pilgrimage that the life of the hero of the independence of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Lumumba's only surviving remains, a single tooth, arrived in Kinshasa on Monday, where it is due to be laid to rest later this week. The nationalist politician became an anti-colonial icon when he delivered a fiery speech against racism on June 30, 1960, when his native Central African country proclaimed independence from Belgium. Congolese President Felix Tshisekedi received the remains at Kinshasa's International Airport. Lumumba's tooth is due to be laid to rest in a ceremony in Kinshasa on Thursday, the 62nd anniversary of independence from Belgium and his historic speech. teleSUR expands its signal with new satellite parameters since more than ever the world connects to us and our stories are heard in other faraway nations. These parameters are in place since June 1st in Latin America and the Caribbean, both in English and in Spanish, and quite soon further changes will be implemented for the signals in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. These news multiplexes will continue providing truthful content to oppose the hegemonic media's narrative and our faithfulness to our audience. We've come to the end of this news brief. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also join us on our social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram. For teleSUR English, I'm Luis Alberto Matos. Thank you for watching.